Welcome to the panel discussion of the Montana Society for Conservation Biology Symposium. Thanks everyone for attending. The Society for Conservation Biology is a global community of conservation professionals. We have more than 10,000 members worldwide and are dedicated to promoting the scientific study of the maintenance, loss, and restoration of biological diversity. The Montana chapter of the SCB has the same mission of the Society as a whole, but focuses on issues that pertain to Montana and our region. In the past, we have hosted regional meetings, commented on public policy, sponsored film and speaker events, as well as developed educational programs. If you're interested, you can learn more about us by searching us on the web. Tonight's panel will be followed by a reception and poster session just right out here. And tomorrow we'll have a full day of talks. It'll be also right in this room. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this symposium, the Nature Conservancy, the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Wildlife Program of the University of Montana, and the Defenders of Wildlife. Tonight's panel features an incredible lineup of conservation all-stars. Their accomplishments are impressive and extensive, and it would probably take me an hour to talk about them all, so I'll keep it brief in my introduction, focusing on the books they've published. First off, moderating the session will be Jody Hilty, the Director of North American Program for the Wildlife Conservation Society and author of Corridor Ecology, the Science and Practice of Linking Landscapes for Biodiversity Conservation, and co-editor of Safe Passages, Highways, Wildlife, and Habitat Connectivity. Our panel members include the founder of Conservation Biology, Dr. Michael Soule, and three of his former doctorate students at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Michael Soule, professor of environmental studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz, grew up in San Diego and earned his PhD from Stanford, studying population biology and evolution under Paul Ehrlich. Dr. Soule has written or edited many books on conservation biology, including, I'll read these a little fast, Conservation Biology, an Ecology Evolutionary Perspective, Conservation and Evolution, Conservation Biology, the Science of Scarcity and Diversity, Viable Populations for Conservation, Research Priorities in Conservation Biology, and the Conservation Biology Research Priorities for the Next Decade. Thanks to Dr. Soule for his talk earlier this afternoon that I hope many of you were able to attend. And now for Dr. Soule's disciples. Scott Mills. Is that a bad word? Scott Mills completed his dissertation under Michael Soule in 1993, entitled Extinctions in Habitat Remnants, Proximate Mechanisms, and Biogeographic Consequences. He is now professor of wildlife population ecology at the University of Montana. Scott has recently published a textbook called Conservation of Wildlife Populations, Demography, Genetics, and Management. In 2009, Scott was awarded the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship, which I recall was the same year Scott gave a talk at an earlier Montana Society for Conservation Biology Research Symposium, perhaps not coincidentally. Sanjin completed his dissertation under Michael Soule in 1997, entitled Genetic Variation, Physiology, and Survival in a Natural Population of Pocket Gophers. He is now the lead scientist for the Nature Conservancy and a TV host for documentaries appearing on the Discovery Channel and the BBC. Sanjin will also be hosting a conservation Q&A tomorrow at 4 p.m. at this conference in this room, so don't miss that. Sanjin is a Cato Fellow and a past elected governor of the Society for Conservation Biology. He co-edited the book Connectivity Conservation with the panelist sitting next to him, Kevin Crooks. Kevin Crooks completed his dissertation under Michael Soule in 1999, entitled Mammalian Carnivores, Mesopredator Release, and Evofaunal Extinctions in a Fragmented System. He is now Associate Professor and Montfort Professor in the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology at Colorado State University. Kevin will also be speaking tomorrow at 1 p.m. on connectivity and wildlife conservation in urbanizing landscapes, another potential Guggenheim inspiring talk you don't want to miss. And last but not least, Joel Berger, another pioneer in the conservation biology movement, will be offering a summary perspective of the panel discussion. Joel never earned a PhD under Michael Soule, but he did get one from University of Colorado in Boulder. Okay. He is currently the Craighead Chair and Professor of Wildlife Conservation here at the UM and directs a number of projects for the Wildlife Conservation Society. Joel has authored or edited numerous books, including Large Carnivores and Conservation of Biodiversity, The Better to Eat You With, Fear in the Animal World, as well as books on rhinos, bison, and wild horses. Joel also gave an enlightening talk at last year's MTSCB Symposium and has continually supported our group. Now, before we get started, I would like to give a special thanks to new MTSCB, well, not that new, but new this year, board members Julie Betch and Nick Sharp, who not only came up with the idea for this event, but also put it in place and use their connections to make it happen. Julie is Scott Mills' PhD student, and thus Michael Soule's academic granddaughter, I suppose. And Nick is Joel Berger's PhD student. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the other two board members, Eric Akanison, whose advertising helped fill the room, did a good job, and Adam Sotowski, who handed over the presidency to become a new father, but has really remained our leader. And with that, on with the show. Jody.
Thank you. So the rules. We're going to start off with a 3-minute surprise from Scott Mills. Then each of the panelists are going to give a 3-minute synopsis of something that they're thinking about, yet to be defined. I'll cut them off if they speak for too long. Then I'll ask them a series of questions until about 7:50. Joel Berger will then try to summarize what is said. And then after that, there will be an opportunity for you all to ask questions. The microphone is right there. Please line up, and Adam will turn it on. So, any questions from you all?
There's some seats here. Anyone back there wants to move up.
Yeah, so don't be shy. Come to the front. And go ahead.
Yeah, so I just thought I would start with a little visual aid. In the year 2000, we here at University of Montana hosted the conservation biology meetings. We had about 2,000 people here. And the keynote speaker we invited for that session was Michael Soule. And at the time, the Society for Conservation Biology did not have a fundraising office in D.C., or there was no central office in D.C. for purposes of lobbying. And Michael had been fighting that for a long time, and the board of governors of the society had been mostly resisting it. And so he gave a rousing, barn-burning, Southern preacher style, which is interesting for Michael since he's from California, but Southern preacher style speech where he ended it with, if you believe that SCB should have an office in D.C., take $1 out and pass it to the aisles. And we were in the University Theater, the one that has the big upstairs balcony. And Michael said that I only trust 3 people in this room to collect the money, my former students. So I'm going to have Sanj and Kevin and Scott walk around and collect the money. And it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen at this university, because we just went walking down the aisles, and money, it was like a ticker tape parade. Dollar bills were falling out of the balcony. They were being thrown across the room. There were dollar bills everywhere. And so at the end of it, we started counting it up, and David Inouye was there and took a picture. And so this picture shows Kevin, Sanjan, and I 11 years ago counting the money, and I'd written on the back of the picture, it's $745 that we got from Michael's speech. So there's no telling how much you're going to be having to give up tonight for what cause. But anyway, we thought that was worth talking about because it sort of sets this idea, a couple of ideas. One is that the idea of conservation biology having a policy office was not even an idea until Michael got it going in 2000. Oh, because there's a camera.
It's up there.
Oh, okay, good. I was going to pass it around. And then, but then the other thing that we wanted to kind of convey with this is that, we have all known each other for a really long time. The three of us were grad students. We overlapped at least a little bit. Kevin was a newbie, and so he was a baby. He didn't overlap much. But and obviously Michael has this immense influence on all of us, and so all three of us. And so, Michael's hovering in the background while we're doing the work, counting the money. Michael's in the background. So there's several messages conveyed by this picture.
I think the most important thing about that is power of idea. So please give us your first idea for the night.
Are we going from the youngest? Did we agree
Oh, are
on
we
this?
going youngest? Oh, sorry.
The newbie gets
The newbie, I guess it was the baby of the group, was that right?
Baby.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, well, I have a statement here. The question is, for me, for this discussion, is will we as conservation biologists and can we, as the Society for Conservation Biology, rise to the challenge to tackle the wicked problems that face us? Or are we going to fail? I think we can meet the challenge, but not without change. But as we discuss and perhaps debate future strategies for conservation, one caution I'm going to give is to try to avoid false dichotomies. Science is littered with lengthy, polarized debates about artificial choices, debates that seemingly advance scientific careers more than science itself. Top-down versus bottom-up, single large versus several small. Are corridors good or are they bad? Of course, the answer is not one or the other, but rather both, or it depends. And such is the case with future strategies for conservation biology. We need to employ all possible solutions at our disposal. So yes, we must value biodiversity for its utilitarian benefit, quantifying ecosystem services and communicating them clearly to a wide audience. But we must also not overlook the intrinsic value of biodiversity, a fundamental motivation for conservation. Yes, we must incorporate socioeconomic considerations into our efforts because without including the human dimension, conservation will fail. But we must not lose sight of the biology in conservation biology. Yes, we must adopt bottom-up, grassroots, community-based, collaborative conservation. But there still is an important role for traditional top-down command and control strategies which have helped clean our water and clean our air and protect endangered species and wilderness areas. And finally, yes, universities should be the engine of scientific research, but we also need to ensure our research informs policy, and we don't do a good enough job of that. So yes, we must continue to publish rigorous science in scientific journals, but we also have to recognize the woeful inadequacy of a very limited audience of scientists reading our papers in those journals. Gone are the days where we should measure success in academia solely or primarily by numbers of publications or amount of indirect dollars brought into universities. We must not only be skilled scientists and researchers, but also effective teachers and leaders and communicators and motivators. And in so being, we must appeal to a much wider audience, including connecting our future generations to nature. So in short, my message is that there are going to be no magic bullets, no single or easy answers to meet the challenge. To me, the genius of SCB is that we all have a common mission, a single purpose, no matter our career paths or institutions we work for or our backgrounds. And that common mission should sustain us, even if we disagree on the details of how we should proceed forward. We need to avoid false choices, find common ground, and develop coalitions that speak with one concerted, powerful voice about our duty to protect our natural world. Thanks.
That was really very, very nice, Kevin. Just
Thank
way too
you very
polite.
much, Sons.
All right. So I'm just going to throw out some ideas out there and allow questions to sort of prompt you along. First thing I need to say is that there's a difference between conservation biology and being a conservationist. And I am more on the conservationist side than the conservation biologist side. I work for a charity, for a conservation organization. So that said, I'll say there's a couple of things going on. The first is, I really don't think we're much of a movement. We think we're part of the conservation movement, but we're not. We're a niche. We're mostly white people. We're mostly white and rich. We're mostly white, rich, and older. And we think we're changing the world. We're not. We're really a very pretty narrow niche. And we use two tools to do that. We use either laws, beat people over the head with regulation, or we use private philanthropy in order to go and do it. That's it. And that just cannot be scaled up. You can't really hope to affect change at any grand scale if our movement looks like it does. So why is that? So I think there are two things going on. The first is that the people we're speaking to for a while, we've ignored some of the audiences that we can't afford to ignore any longer. And I can elaborate this later, but the three that I really want to point out are, the first is the business community, and I'll tell you why later if you'd like. But I think it's a big mistake to alienate the business community, even though at times, many times, you want to challenge them about their practices. We're all part of it. Everything you buy, wear, use, eat, drink is part of it. So alienating is like alienating, part of yourselves in a lot of ways. The second is the poor. So there's a billion people who earn less than $1 a day, who live very much on the edge of society and often in places we care about from a nature's perspective. And we cannot afford to alienate them. If they don't become allies in our movement, we're done. Might as well call it quits right now, go drinking. And the third is the youth. We have almost nothing to really say to young people. So when I go out and teach classes at this university and ask people like, well, how many of you Twitter or how many of you have a Facebook page? I usually get a laugh. And it's astonishing to me because it seemed like, oh my God, what? Tweet? You got to be kidding me. But guess what? That's how the world is happening. That Arab Spring didn't spring out of nothing. So if you want your own green spring, then you have to use the tools that others are employing. The second piece of this is that I think that the way we message why we care about nature is completely wrong. So we are born of the philosophies of John Muir and Ed Abbey. Desert solitaire, man alone in the wilderness. Wilderness is a place set apart from man. But that's not how most of the world see it. Go to a park and look at who's enjoying that park. Go to any park in California. You'll see Hispanic families, you'll see Asian families. Look at how they're doing it. It's their aunts, uncles, grandfathers, grandmothers, kids. There's music, they're loud. You're kind of embarrassed by them if you're Asian like me. You kind of walk past them pretty quickly. And then you get on the trails and it's some lonely dude, completely kitted up in Patagonia gear, looking kind of angry and very much alone. So humans are an incredible social species. We do everything, socially. So why have we decided that the pursuit of nature should require us to unplug? Nature is the biggest social network. Why do we want to unplug from it?
That's very nice, Sanj.
You're welcome, Pat.
So Jody said we were supposed to pick Jody said we were supposed to pick a topic or two of the sort of provocative. So I decided the provocative one that I would pick, then I sort of switched gears a little bit after Michael's talk today, is on the role of conservation biology science. I'm going to make the argument that conservation biology science in the 24 years since I started working with Michael has become truly mainstream and effective, and that's a good thing. My fear is probably not that science is irrelevant or misdirected, but that it's always in jeopardy of losing credibility through misuse, even in including the conservation community. And I'll hasten to say, because of the person on my right here, that this is not conservative academic speak, claiming that advocacy has no place in science, because I do think that advocacy has a place in science, but for me it's an intense plea that we could lose our scientific credibility with the public even faster than we gained it, and if we do lose it, that we've lost very much indeed. And there's a lot of examples you could give where science, pointy-headed academic science, has played a really important role in conservation. I think one of the most powerful one is, of course, the story of the pelicans, eagles, falcons that were heading towards extinction in the 50s and 60s until some pointy-headed biologists and chemists got together and discovered that this compound known as DDT, which the guy that invented it got a Nobel Prize for inventing it, was soluble in fats, accumulating in predatory birds, reducing clutch size, reducing population growth, and sending these birds towards almost certain extinction. So that was a case where nothing about the story was intuitive, and yet both the problem and the solution were identified by rigorous science. Another great example, which I'll just mention briefly, is Florida panthers, where heading towards extinction until about 5 years ago when 8 Texas panthers were brought in to break the inbreeding depression that they were suffering. And so this concept of genetic rescue, a concept that emerged from a lot of pointy-headed academic research, initiated actually by Michael himself in the early and mid-1980s, led to this surprising and non-intuitive insight. So to toss a little gunpowder on the fire, I'll just give briefly 2 examples where I think rigorous science was thrown under the bus in the name of conservation outcomes, to the detriment of both conservation and to long-term credibility of conservation science. The first was in Lynxgate, which many of you have heard me rant about in 2002, where some folks in the name of lynx conservation argued that it was okay to submit mislabeled samples to a national lynx distribution study. The second is the delisting of wolves in Idaho and Montana. Although I agree that it was a travesty that a delisting mandate came from Congress, I believe that the greater tragedy was that the congressional move was an inevitable outcome from, in many cases, misuse of science to gain a conservation objective, which was to prevent the delisting of wolves under any conditions. So we can come back to that one. But my last thing I want to say is that I think we have to be vigilant in upholding the application of science, even if the outcome's not in the direction we want for a short-term conservation goal. So my plea is that in a zero-sum game of time, we can't relax our commitment to science in helping to resolve the crisis. We can't throw the scientific rigor baby out with the conservation crisis bathwater. So I just gave Michael a lot of fodder. That's been my job.
I don't disagree, actually. I think the kind of science that was used to try to extend the endangered status of wolves was questionable, as were the methods. So it's a complicated issue. Anyway, a cynic might say that conservation biologists have become like hospice attendants to a moribund biota on a planet under siege, providing only palliative pain relief. With no hope to staunch the hemorrhaging of extinction, we turn to devices which might buy some time, but which really won't deal with the crisis. These devices include things like charging for ecosystem services, which is bound to fail in my view. Another one is sustainable development. There's hardly any examples, and it's really an academic subject as far as I'm concerned. Cost-benefit planning, which admits we're going to lose. It's just a question of how badly we're going to lose. Development mitigation. There's going to be development. It's going to hurt nature, but let's try to soften it around the edges. Surveys after surveys. Planning exercises after planning exercises. Extinction risk estimation. Instead of doing anything about extinction, we see dozens of papers being published on the best way to estimate the risk of extinction. Why bother? Invasive species control. It's good, but we're not going to get rid of invasive species by controlling them. in most cases. Financial incentives to communities and people so that they won't destroy the last water body or riparian area. That's okay. It's just necessary in some situations. Triage. Extinction risk, I already said that. Multi-scale social analyses, whatever the hell that is. Smart CBD targets, such as the one in the current issue of the magazine put out by the Ecological Society, which, because the original Convention on Biodiversity targets were completely missed. They weren't met at all. They developed a new set of targets which are even more unrealistic. I'm almost done. Anyway, there is no passion or vision in these tepid ideas. It amazes me that red-blooded students would find anything compelling about these ideas. Is there an alternative? Can there be real protection? I think so. This is my last statement. Is there any place now in universities or in chapters of the Society for Conservation Biology for real conservation? Can we attract support and underwriting from local organizations, from businesses and educational institutions? What if each chapter selected a critical linkage in their region to implement a program to maintain and enhance connectivity in that linkage using multidisciplinary collaboration, biology, political science, sociology, and community input? Is this applied science or radical advocacy?
Thank you. Before I ask you questions, would any of you like to comment on what the others of you have said? Well, then we'll just dive right in. So one of the issues that I think is really pertinent to this room, it works, it's just that he's leaning too far away.
I can close this now.
We're not used to the high horses.
Yeah, we got them on high horses so y'all can see them all. See how they ride in Montana. So one of the issues that's really pertinent to this audience is the issue of what we're giving our graduate students. And we all have had, I think, a fairly heated debate about this on our email. But I want to hear a little bit more from you. What, I venture to say that you all don't think that you're giving your students what they need to be prepared. So if that's true, then what do we need to be doing in graduate programs in order to truly prepare graduate students to make a difference in conservation to conservation biology?
Well, I can start, and I concur that we're not adequately training our students to be change agents outside when they leave, both undergrad and graduate students. I think we're doing a very good job training you all, if I don't say so myself, to be good technical scientists, but not necessarily to make a difference when you get out. So I think that, and I bet you, I know that these guys are going to concur with most of this, is that we need more than the biology and the science. We need a lot of policy classes, and specifically the interface between policy and science. That's something that is completely missing. We don't have that kind of course really at the graduate level at CSU and kind of at the undergraduate level. We need communication. We need marketing. We need a lot more human dimensions classes. So conflict resolution, basic human dimensions like attitudinal theory. Those kinds of things are largely missing from our curriculum. Just for perspective, I'm in a fish, wildlife, and conservation biology program, and we have 3 different concentrations within our major. It's fish, wildlife, and conservation. And then I also co-advise with Rick Knight the interdisciplinary studies program in conservation biology. And in thinking about this, I look back at our curriculum, and we do a pretty good job with the conservation biology side, but not a good job on the social science side and the outreach and communication.
I mean, I guess I'll say that I'm more optimistic about our program. I mean, I guess I feel like we have those offerings. You know, the thing is you can't. It is a zero-sum game. You know, you can't add on courses without taking some off at the undergraduate level and the graduate level. And I'd say we think a lot about that. And part of the problem is it's hard, to answer your question, it's hard to know exactly what kind of conservation biology career you're preparing a person for. But you know, we try to have different options so that people can take more courses in policy, or economics, or law, or whatever. But I guess I just think that I'm hesitant to talk about going too far down the road of changing the curriculum, because I do think that having that strong science core for those that want to do the strong science is really critical. So I would hate to see a curriculum be changed and undercut the statistics and calculus and chemistry and genetics and evolution for those that are going to be working at the science side of things.
So when people, when you ask students, why do you want to do conservation biology as opposed to everything else they can do around that field, the overwhelming response you get from them is because we want to make a difference. You hear that over and over again, and Michael himself described it as a crisis discipline, right? I don't know if you want to show that poster, but you can, he had this great, so in his book in 1980, is it 87 or 85?
This is from the
87.
85.
Oh, in 1985, Michael did this book, and in the book he had this diagram, and the diagram shows cancer biology, and then it has conservation biology, and he has various disciplines here that were going to be part of this emerging field at that point of conservation biology. So there's things like island biogeography, historical biogeography, hazard evaluation, physiology, genetics, social sciences, natural resources like forestry, fisheries, etc. And I really like that, because it really did prompt what many people tell me, that they want to do this because they're impatient for change. And so while I agree with Scott that it is a zero-sum game, I think the challenge is that we are training decent scientists, but they're not impatient for change. They're not. So how do you still give people really great training in something good and something fundamental, which I support, but then create in them the urgency for change. Allow them the voice to say, here's why we care and here's how we're going to change it. And give them the tools then to get going along that way. I mean, in my organization, we have 500 scientists or so, and I cannot tell you how massive that divide is between, the scientists who can speak the language that motivates the masses and the vast majority who can't. And I really see that as a huge, huge, huge barrier in conservation biology right now.
How do you teach that?
Well, one option is it doesn't. I mean, I agree with the zero-sum game, and we play.
Sorry, but we gotta get Sule. You gotta raise your hand.
I'll turn off my mic.
He has all these rules.
I think we need to make a distinction, guys, between what you do in your graduate programs or undergraduate programs and what the Society for Conservation Biology chapter does. The chapters are not academic organizations. I don't know what they are, but there's a lot of unrealized potential, I think, in the chapters. And when a student graduates, that's it. He leaves the university, and there's very little contact after that. But a SCB chapter here at Missoula goes on, generation after generation, with a lot of overlap between students of different years. So my thought is that a chapter take on a project based on a conservation project, which is certainly going to be informed by conservation biology, but like lots of senior projects, multidisciplinary senior projects in environmental studies programs or planning or architecture programs, the students get together, the members get together, and try to solve a real problem. Like there's a place in the county where wildlife keep getting hit by cars trying to cross the highway. Well, what do you do about that? Well, it's been solved many places in many ways, but each time it's different because of the situation, the social context and the biological context. But a project like that could bring together students from many disciplines, working together to solve one problem. And if they don't finish before they graduate, then other people coming into the chapter can continue to work on it. And the end result will be a project like the one in just east of Albuquerque in Tejeras Canyon, where a lot of wildlife were getting hit by cars. A lot of insurance companies were paying huge amounts of money to pay off the costs. And the community was upset. People were getting hurt by the collisions. Animals were dying. And they solved the problem. And it wasn't the university that solved it. It was some NGOs. But a chapter could do that sort of thing. It's still science. It's still social science and biological science.
Kevin, and I'm going to ask you guys, because we have so little time, try to be really concise in what you're saying. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I co-advise the SCB chapter for CSU. It's slightly different because it is a student-based chapter, more akin to a Wildlife Society student club. But Michael, we're trying exactly that. I co-advise it with Rick Knight, and we've adopted a large ranch north of Fort Collins, the Roberts Ranch, which is a critical piece in a connectivity linkage from mountains to plains. And so the students are going out there and basically doing restoration projects. And what we're trying to do is keep this going, so even though we have turnover of students, we have this project that we can involve the students in. So I agree that the chapters can fulfill that function.
So one of the next questions I want to ask you is this issue around scientists and advocacy. And so, Scott, I might misstate what you said, but I think you said that there is room for advocacy around science. And some of the issues around conservation biology are, do the conservation biologists stop at publishing their papers? And several of you have referred to that. I want to hear a little bit more about what it looks like to be a conservation biologist and move that science into action.
So Scott was partly wrong about what he said about scientists. So he said that, the DDT crisis, he says, look, here's an example of how science and good science helps solve this problem. He said it not only showed the way, but it also provided the solution. Well, but it really didn't. It did do one part of it, which is sort of figure out the mechanism and what was doing it. But the person who brought it to light, to American light, was Rachel Carson. And Rachel was routinely derided by other scientists for her stance, for advocacy. Routinely derided by them. She's never brought into the National Academy of Sciences. She really was seen as a wacko when she started off. And yet she was impatient for change. See, look at the... look at all these talks that we had today. There's like 60-plus talks. So where's the talk about how to kick ass? Right? I mean, that's what, it's not that the science isn't important, but if you can't take that and actually motivate change, and which can be taught and it can be learned, you're only doing part of it. You're only doing part of it. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. But don't consider yourself a movement. Don't say you're a conservationist. You're not.
They swore that they wouldn't swear.
Oh.
But when we met together at my house a year or two ago, we would talk to each other, but we weren't this kind to each other. We'd say that's total bullshit.
There was also a lot of tequila involved.
But we had a bottle of tequila too.
Yeah, exactly. I requested tequila for this panel. I got it on record.
And my point. Thank you. Definitely, of course, Rachel Carson's book. But my point is that Rachel Carson would have had nothing to write about if the scientists hadn't done that. And so, my point is not that scientists, are the complete story. The science is the complete story, but I think it's way too easy because science often is hard. It takes a long time. It's expensive to do it right. It's complicated. And too often the message is you're just you pointy-headed, long scientists with too many big words and too complex are just sort of getting in the way of getting conservation done. So my point is just that is to argue that for all of these problems, it does take it does take this broad spectrum of efforts. Michael's mentor, Arne Ness, we went on a lab trip retreat to Baja one year, and Arne came with us, and he had this.
Who Arne is.
Arne Ness is the founder, the intellectual and philosophical founder of the deep ecology movement, and a remarkable fellow. But he had a saying that was, "The frontier is long." And at the time, I was sort of a brash student, and I thought that's just a bonehead platitude, that doesn't mean anything. But now, I really see that this idea of the frontier being long, it is a profound statement, because and so all I'm saying is the science had to be there, and Rachel Carson had to be there, no doubt, that outreach side of things. Can we teach one person to do all those things? Can we teach whole generations of graduate students to do all those things? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think that they are skills that we can teach our students. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I don't think we're all going to be Sanjan flying around and spreading the word. But I think we need to be better spreading the.
I think that's what I do, right?
Spread the gospel. We can't be Sanjan and all be translation.
Actually, we're not sure what you do, Sanjan. We just know you're gone all the time.
We can't all be translational scientists. But we can give our students and ourselves skills. So, for instance, we have a School for Global Environmental Sustainability at CSU. They had a workshop for senior PhD students last spring. It was on environmental science communication. It was a hardcore 2 days. No one was allowed in. They brought in Nancy Barron. They brought in Cornelia Dean. And those students learned some skills. There's tricks of the trade. I personally don't know them. But there are tricks to communicate effectively with the media and with the public. And I think we're not doing a good job with that.
I just wanted to reiterate that no one student has all the skills it could possibly learn in the 2 or 3 years of a graduate program, those skills. But that's why we have multidisciplinary problem-solving entities, and where students from different disciplines come together to work on a problem. They do that in architecture all the time. They do that in many of the social sciences, in political science, because all problems these days are complex, socially, scientifically, culturally complex. So we need experts from lots of fields working together, and that's what the SCB chapters could be. It could be places where people get together for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and work on a connectivity problem, for example, in the area. And with engineers, with rural sociologists, with political scientists and biologists, and marketing people, communication experts. So, because that's what it takes to solve these problems.
So SCB, because of you, Michael, now has a political wing, and that political wing is to represent all of the members. Many of you are members in this audience, to get the science into political action. And yet, this morning you said that maybe you wouldn't have even founded conservation biology if you saw where it was today. So where should we go? These students are invested. These professionals in this audience are invested. Should we just drop it? Should we reformulate it? What does it need to look like?
Well, it's really hard to change an organization because there's egos, and those egos become invested in a particular way of doing things, a particular philosophy. So it needs to be shaken up. I'm not saying it was a mistake to help create conservation biology or the Society for Conservation Biology. But, Thomas Jefferson says we need a new constitution every 20 years. We just burn the old Constitution of the United States and bring a new group of people together to write a new constitution. That's the sort of thinking I'm talking about, where we sort of say, what if we were starting the society today? How would we do it? And my suggestion about having the chapters take on a real-world local problem and solve it, bringing together lots of disciplines, is a way around this impasse and the entrenched attitudes that the governors of the Society for Conservation Biology have developed, the culture they've developed over the last 20 years.
agreed.
Okay, so what's the new constitution? What's the way forward for the, Michael, to just put it out there, do you really think that if we have the 24 chapters for conservation biology, that we're going to shift the conservation paradigm in this country? Or is there more that needs to be done?
No, I'm not exactly suggesting that in the short term. What I'm suggesting is, I didn't know that, I didn't know there were 24 chapters. That's great. That means there's 24 problems in 24 parts of the country, conservation problems involving extinction of local species that could be worked on and perhaps solved. Lots of conservation NGOs work that way. They take a problem in their area, they work on it for several years and often solve it with a wildlife overpass or an underpass or with some other tools. So instead of trying to change the society, I think there could be a revolution from the bottom up. That is, the young people in this room could start working differently and not focusing so much on what they're doing at the national level, but on what we as an SCB chapter are doing here in Missoula or in Bozeman, and what kind of conservation outcome can we get.
So I think Sanjan's the most hardcore about changing the society from the emails. I haven't talked to you about this. I mean, see, I actually wouldn't, I don't think the society needs to be overhauled. I think that the meetings provide a forum for people to exchange ideas. I actually am more optimistic about the role of the journal maybe than Michael is. I think it's serving a useful function. I think maybe Sanjan is more down on the society.
Only to the point, I understand the inertia and the challenges with having a society that's supposed to represent a lot of people, but I think it leaves out a lot. I think that's the part of it. And I think that it's almost self-fulfilling in the way it sort of goes about doing it. So, it doesn't have a lot of voices. If you look at what people do in conservation, the people who are active in the front end of conservation, the work that people at Wildlife Conservation Society do, or the Nature Conservancy, or World Wildlife Fund, or others like that, or even in the government agencies, and actually see what they're doing in conservation. And then you ask, how well does what you see at the Auckland meeting in New Zealand in a couple of weeks is going to reflect that work, or support that work, or help legitimize that work, or give us new tools in order to do our work better? It just doesn't do it. So I think there's a gap there. I'm not suggesting that it's not worthwhile. I'm just saying that maybe there's something else. Maybe there is actually something else that needs to be created. But certainly being a student of conservation biology and being a student of Michael Soule's, coming straight out of academia with these guys, expected SCB to be my professional home. And it isn't. And for many of you who are going out there into the real world and will go into academia or go into other jobs and expect to be impatient for change, you too will find SCB isn't going to be the right home. I'm curious to ask Joel whether he finds it to be his correct professional home.
Very good transition, because it's time for Joel to stand up and try and summarize what you all said.
Take a deep breath for 60 seconds. I have a lot to figure out how to order my summary, so just hold on. All right, so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to try to describe what I learned in the last 45 minutes. And to do that, I'm going to try to make 8 or 9 points. Point 1 would be conservation would not exist as a discipline if it wasn't for us, for people. And what I heard from the panel is that we're failing if we don't start to understand and to change attitudes and to work with people. I also learned that hope comes in different forms. And success comes down a long road, not a very short road. And it takes multidisciplinary approaches. And maybe I didn't learn that today, but it was heartening to hear that again reinforced, because I think we all know there is not one single prescriptive way to move forward. There are multiple ways and multiple disciplines, and trying to unify them is of clear importance. I heard repeated amongst different panel members that the human dimension is not really part of many conservation biology curricula, and that's a failing, and that's something we need to do better, which reflects back to the first point. The problem is people, and so having a human dimension in a program seems important. I also heard that we need to kick butt. I changed the language there. I also heard that not everybody on the panel agrees that there are differences of opinion and that some people could and should stay within their comfort zone, but others shouldn't. And others should feel that it's fine to step away and not follow in other people's path. I heard, and I was very heartened to hear, that research must inform policy. And I remember, this is Joel ad-libbing, that the first time I saw a job that I was interested in at a university in California, Davis, they advertised for a conservation biologist, and it was explicitly stated, and this was in the early 90s, the person's research should very strongly influence policy. And I thought that was great. Now that doesn't differ at all from what Scott Mills was saying. We have to be good scientists, and science has to play a role. But it doesn't always have to play a role. People have to be motivated to make change. I heard that it's important to disentangle advocacy from science, but people can be effective advocates for science and move things forward. And that science has played an important role, I think, as we all know, in lots of different arenas, and I won't go further on that. I heard some attention being paid to ideas about mitigation and trade-offs, and that they're not helping, that combating invasive species is a good beginning, an important battle, and should continue. No, no. Even though Rick said whoops, I'm not going to go whoops.
I was thinking Sandra needs to teach you how to use the iPad.
So I guess in ending, what are the tools needed to make a difference? We've heard diverse opinions, and there is no one prescriptive means forward. And I guess it comes down to the question, what is it that we're going to do to make a difference? But the real question is, you guys, because it's your time, what are you going to do to make a difference?
All right, so I asked some questions. I'd like you to ask some harder questions, so please stand up and get in front of that mic. And keep your questions as short as possible, because I will cut you off. Don't be shy.
Hello. Hi, Kevin. My name's Kate Cleary. I'm a PhD student at the University of Idaho, and I'm in the IGERT program, which is basically what it sounds from what Michael's saying. It's like a program designed to address some of the problems that you're talking about. We work across disciplines, and we try to incorporate humans in all of our research to address real problems. But I would say that I wanted to get into landscape genetics and ecology in my PhD, and I take 2 interdisciplinary classes each semester, and I spend probably 15 hours a week in sociology meetings. So it's really hard to develop interdisciplinary breadth and disciplinary depth. And just, I was wondering if that's where you see, where is a conservation biologist supposed to fall along that spectrum? Thank you.
I was the chair of an environmental studies program at UC Santa Cruz, and that was always the question. There's just too much to learn, and they don't keep expanding the number of years in which students can learn all these subjects. Information and knowledge is growing exponentially, but we don't lengthen the time of the curriculum. It makes it very difficult. So I think the only way that we found that can work is by not having everybody know everything, but by bringing the people who know different things into a room who want to work together to solve a particular problem out there in nature or the community. So there's no way we can all know all of the disciplines.
So, you know, one of the things Michael was really great at as an advisor, and I think my two panelists would agree, is that he gave us a lot of room as an advisor. So he did not try to make me, you know, Scott or Scott Kevin. He didn't have a single mold. He sort of said, what's your interest, you pursue it. So my PhD was a pretty much nuts and bolts kind of PhD. It's genetics, it's population genetics, not very applied. I studied a small rodent, for God's sake, and now I'm like with the Nature Conservancy. But what he allowed me to do was in the summers, I would go and do these long internships for the World Bank. And Michael allowed me to do that. He created space for me to be able to do that. And that was incredibly valuable when I graduated, because I'd got this interdisciplinary skill set of how to talk to economists and bankers just by spending 3 consecutive summers in DC. So, you know, I really thank him for that, because that was amazing kind of training for me going through. And I'm sure you had similar stuff.
Yeah, he definitely allowed us to follow our passion. And Kate, to respond to you, I think that that's what you want to do, is follow your passion. And so if your passion is to merge the disciplines of social science and biological science, then that's what you're going to need to do, even though it's going to be difficult. I have a graduate student right now who's doing something similar. She's getting a concurrent master's degree in human dimensions and natural resources in our department in our college, and then a PhD in wildlife biology. And it's proving extremely challenging for her to dive into all of the sociology and human dimensions. But it's something a skill set that she wants to learn. So I'm encouraging her to do that. For me, it's almost too late. And so I recognize that I can't be a specialist in this. I'm going to quote Clint Eastwood here, if I can. Sure. Can I? I like to quote Clint Eastwood. Yeah. Sanj knows. He said, "A man's got to know his limitations," and I know my limitations. So I know when I need. What I know is what I don't know, right? So I know when I need to bring in the human dimension specialists to collaborate with. And so I'm trying to form the multidisciplinary teams that Michael's talking about to be successful. But I'm trying my darndest to give my students the opportunity to learn the skills that I didn't in graduate school.
Yeah, I don't think I would add much more, just to say that, I think it's the responsibility of the program and the advisors to give the opportunity for people to choose from that palette of depth and breadth. And obviously some people like to be generalist, and others want to and need to drill down really deeply into a particular topic of evolutionary biology or physiological ecology or whatever it is. So I think it's a pretty personal decision.
So unless y'all line up, I'm going to start asking questions, which I will. Oh, no, Christy.
All right, Christy.
In this world of myriad NGOs, I know in Bozeman alone, there's Jody, like 30 some odd NGOs in Bozeman alone. How do we speak with one voice for conservation? When everyone has, very similar, sometimes overlapping objectives, but very disparate places they're working. We've got the Rockies, we've got the plains, we've got the water systems. How do we speak with one voice?
Just to highlight something that I said during my statement, is that I really do believe the fact that SCB has a common mission is a genius and a radical idea. And so I think that helps us all find that common voice. We all have a common mission, no matter what our specific research interests are. But my concern is that we are often competing with one another, and that's just not in the NGO world. Of course, academics compete all the time. I don't know who here went to the TWS meetings in Hawaii last week, but a major theme of the plenary was to develop coalitions across broad stakeholder groups to talk about the common mission of wildlife conservation. And they had a speaker for TWS and SCB and Sierra Club and Boone and Crockett. And basically they told us, and that's in part why I said it for my statement, is to go spread the word about this common mission. We shouldn't be bickering about what are, in essence, petty differences.
But competition isn't all that bad. I mean, I think there's an enormous amount of pressure for NGOs to collaborate. But it's very hard to do it, not because we don't collegially like the other people in these other organizations, but it takes enormous cultural inertia to do it. It's much, much harder to do it. And you see it in the business world all the time. Of course, they don't, right? So the only way businesses ever collaborate is if they have a takeover or they have a merger. And a merger is just a simple cost-cutting measure. There's only two things that happen. CEO pays go up and people get laid off. I mean, that is literally every merger. So it's not clear to me why you would want, at some level you do want one voice. You want to be supportive of colleagues. But I don't necessarily think you need to have one size to deal with a problem that really is multidimensional in so many ways. I think it's okay to have a little competition.
If you're going to ask the next question, get in line now, please.
So you guys talked a lot about being advocates for change and I guess like trying to be those effectors in our generation being, impatient for change, I guess. But I feel like in the scientific community, like if you are wanting to go into academia, it's almost considered a bad thing to be advocates, and that a scientific paper or just an article written in the New York Times, written to the larger public media, is not as well accepted as your time spent on actually writing a scientific paper. And so do you think that that's a paradigm shift that needs to change in science in general, or that's just something that our generation has to go through and kind of, I guess, like just do without worrying about the consequences, like in our future?
It depends a lot on the field. For example, conservation biology was founded to be an applied science, not a pure science. It was supposed to take science and apply it to real problems in the world, namely extinction. But there's still a tendency in academia, there's still pressure within the institutions to make you conform to this ideal of the physicist who does only pure science, although a lot of physicists make bombs. But the best example is probably medicine. People in medical schools do applied science all the time, and they don't get criticized for it, whereas people in biology criticize other biologists who are doing applied science. The reason is that medical schools bring in a lot more money, that they get grants from NIH and for doing applied science, and if you bring in a $2 or $3 million grant, they don't care what the hell you do. They're very happy to get the money. Whereas we bring in $100,000 and we think we're lucky, but the deans keep saying that's not enough, that's not enough. So it's a scale issue with regard to money largely, but conservation biology is an applied science, and if people tell you you shouldn't be applied or you shouldn't be advocates, they don't really understand what this is all about.
I mean, I would say to address the question of the issue in academia, there's lots of programs that are embracing that. I mean, our program certainly does. There's certainly lots of reward at the faculty level here at University of Montana for faculty that do outreach, that write popular articles, that do very applied stuff, and that's true in wildlife biology and in biology and related disciplines. So and I know the same is true at CSU. So there's lots of programs that have gone past this place. I think it's certainly true that 20 years ago, it was really hard to find a university that rewarded applied biology, but now they're definitely out there.
To add to that, maybe a more pessimistic note. That's true, and we're trying to change the reward structure. But the fact of the matter is, in almost all departments I know, you could be an excellent scientist, publish a bunch of papers, do good research, but be a poor teacher and do little to no outreach and get hired and get tenured and get promoted. But the converse is not true. I know personally several examples of people who are excellent teachers, do fantastic research, but didn't quite cut the mustard in terms of publications and overhead, and didn't get tenured or don't get the job. So that, I think we need to change the reward structure to actually not pay lip service to teaching and outreach. I don't know your job description. Mine is 55% research, 35% teaching, and 10% outreach. Jesus. What if, well, service and outreach. What if we actually spent 10% of our time on service and outreach? And let's say half of that was outreach outside the school, so not committee service, but like doing something outside the walls of academia. That'd be 1 day a week that all professors would have to do something outside the walls. And that would make a change, because they don't now. This is a
perhaps
passionate
be a
point
good
for me.
example for their students. Next question.
My question actually plays into that quite a bit. I was wondering, so you listen to the titles of the books that you folks have published, and they sound very worthy, but really heady and probably not read by the wider public. Should there be more pressure for academics to write popular books that are going to reach a broader audience?
That's why you should watch the television shows I did. Because
Hey, well, that's a softball. Come on. I got to say that if you look on Amazon.com for connectivity conservation, I think it might be ranked 1,570,000 out of all the books there. So I think we're doing pretty good. Yeah, we're doing pretty good.
But I get my answer to that would be not pressure. I mean, certainly that should be rewarded for those that are good at it. But I don't think I think it would be wrong. I think it would be wrong to force people, because it takes an awful lot of time to write, whether you're writing for the scientific audience or a popular audience, and some do better at different ends of that spectrum.
So tonight we heard a lot about how things aren't working and how things are failing, and I was wondering if what is working? Is there anything that is effective that is working?
Yeah. Well, I had a 5-minute talk and they cut me to 3, and what I cut out was the stuff that was working. So what I wanted to say as well is that there's been successes that we shouldn't discount. I always say this because when I give the doom and gloom lectures, I can see, to my students, I can see the wall, the glazed eyes, and all the passion just draining out of their faces. And so, we have restored some degraded environments. We've recovered endangered species. We've increased the number and extent of protected areas globally over the last couple days, and tomorrow we've heard and will hear examples of where people are actually in the real world implementing connectivity conservation, right? I actually looked back at your chapter, Michael's introduction to the Yellow Book. And the Yellow Book was our Bible back in the day. The Yellow Book was the 1986 conservation biology book that was the textbook before the others came out in the 90s. And I don't know if you remember this, Michael, but you listed 3 impediments to the future progress of conservation biology. And one was that there was no programs or no courses in conservation biology. And now that's changed. We have conservation biology programs and courses worldwide. Another one is that we didn't communicate well with each other. So academics didn't communicate well with one another rapidly enough. And I think that that's certainly changed. So at least the couple of the impediments that were envisioned back in the mid-'80s, we've actually overcome. So we have made a difference. I bet you, by show of hands, I'm curious, by show of hands, who here can point to at least one tangible benefit to the natural world stemming from your own efforts or people you work with? Who here has had at least one tangible benefit. Yeah, we're making a difference. I can point to at least half dozen, 10 benefits to the systems I study, the organisms I study, and that I care about. Okay.
We should just go get a drink then. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons for hope, and not just hope, but really sort of knowing, it's not hope, it's just that this is a really unique moment in time. And I really feel the sense of history that's upon us. So that yellow book, Michael's, you know, conservation biology book, had on the cover the black rhino. The numbers of black rhino today, though not out of harm, is higher than it was when that book was written, noticeably higher than it was when that book was written. You know, so there are lots of examples we can point to. And I also think there's one other thing that's going on right now is that young people who are impatient for change have an ability now to reach other people and create a movement around it. So, you know, one of the hardest questions I get asked by kids when I give talks is that, what can I do? And what's really interesting now is that, you know, a kid who wants to donate his birthday, for example, to conservation or change something in the way what they buy that's less environmentally impactful is not just doing it alone, but is now able to network with all his or her other friends. And that's an incredible power. It's this power of not just one person doing change, but then influencing all these other people to also do change, because you have the ability now to network. So that youth plus technology, I think, gives you that incredible opportunity. And the last thing I will say is, you know, in Michael's book, and I think it was the yellow book, if not the next one, but I think it was the yellow book, his dedication to that book was not to his, you know, loved ones or, you know, kids or whatever it is. It was to his students. And he basically says, you know, this book is to my students, those who will witness the worst, but have the opportunity to do the most. And I really have taken those lines to heart, because I think we live in a unique generation, the first generation who can see the whole planet all at once after 3.5 million years of seeing the world from a flat plane. And that uniqueness won't come again. We still have time to change the course of this planet. So I really feel that the opportunity has never been greater for us to really make dramatic change. How's that for feeling better?
Yeah.
I'm not a professional conservation biologist. I'm not an academic. I'm, God forbid, one of those agency people Michael was talking about earlier today. And if conservation biology is all about making connections, I think conservation biologists are notably suited to help make those connections, but they need to make them in the social dimension as well as just theorizing about them. And that means going to agencies like national forests, Fish and Wildlife Service, state parks, county park boards, and talking about where the important places are, where you can make the connections. You're incredibly powerful if, for instance, you go to a county park board meeting and they're debating, well, should we buy this piece of parkland here or that piece of parkland there? And you can say, well, I'm a conservation biologist, and actually this piece over here is a key connector for two parks you already have and would make an enormous difference in the viability of the wildlife that's there. There's all kinds of organizations, from local trail advocacy groups, city councils, county commissions, where they're all working on things that are pieces of this puzzle. And you can get involved in those without becoming a strident activist. Just lend your expertise in pointing out what's really important and how things fit together, and you have an enormously powerful voice. And if people would come to agencies with some things like, this is almost a silly question, but how many people in this room have heard about Yellowstone to Yukon? I work for a national forest that's on one of the main corridors, probably a choke point in one of the two main corridors of Yellowstone to Yukon. I have never heard a single person from outside the agency say a word about Yellowstone to Yukon to us.
I think you make a good point, and that's exactly the sorts of things that when I said that I think advocacy does have an important role in science, that's the place exactly where I think scientists can. It's something we do a lot of in our program here, of where the scientists speak to parks or speak to agencies from the perspective of their training and their expertise. And you're right, it really is effective. I mean, I gave the training 2 years ago to Glacier Park, to the entire interpretive staff of Glacier Park, gave a full day of training to them, just talking about everything from climate change to carnivores and stuff. And those kind of things are really useful for the faculty as well as for the agency people. Yeah.
Right, and don't wait till people come to you with some sort of proposal, because the thing is, the concrete's probably about half set up at that point. But listen for what's going on. When there's a park board having a hearing, when there's some trail advocacy group working, when things are in process, find the opportunities to get involved at that point.
This is your last opportunity to ask this group questions.
Guys, thanks a lot again for coming out. I have a question, and it kind of reflects Christy's question about a united message of conservation biologists. And I would agree with her that we kind of need a united message. You know, some of us are counting deck chairs, and some of us have pails. Some of us are looking at which way the water goes down, but there's a hole in the bottom of the boat, and we need to address it. And I think the competition is really divisive, because underlying that is that we're all vying for the same funds. And so the way that I see it is that our science and a lot of our practice is really driven by funding, and it's not exactly driven by the passion anymore. And so I'm wondering how to decouple our actions from the funding mechanisms. Because I see a lot of people's missions and their messages changing in response to where the dollars are. Thank you.
Are you talking about conservation biology, or are you talking about conservation?
Both. I think I've seen that or observed that in both academia and in the NGO world. Maybe not so much in agency. Well, no, in agency, obviously.
So I can speak to conservation, and so if there's one common message that I would like people to walk away from, and I suspect most of us here on this panel would agree with, is the sense of empathy. So, you know, Michael had a big role in sort of teaching me some of that when I was in school, and I kind of put it away for a long time. And now when I have to go out and give talks and go out and meet people in very different fields from what I do, in Kansas or in Nebraska or in Namibia or in China, that word keeps coming back to me. I think the hardest thing, and the one thing I think that conservationists should embrace, is the ability to truly, truly hear people who are unlike themselves. And I don't mean listen to them and roll your eyes on the inside. I mean truly listen to them. If you can't actually understand or hear what they're saying, you have no hope of trying to even get your message across to half the country who won't listen to you. You know, people talk about, you know, how is climate science so ignored? You know, how can you ignore, you know, inconvenient truth? And I ask my friends, if Sarah Palin goes out and does a movie, and let's say she did a great movie on ocean conservation, how many of your friends would just outright dismiss it simply because of who did it? And so how can we say, you know, to people in Nebraska or North Dakota, well, how can you ignore, you know, inconvenient truth? It's because, you know, we use the word of war and, you know, the war on nature and, you know, the destruction of nature, and it's incredibly polarizing, and it's incredibly off-putting to anyone who really doesn't, you know, sort of hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid like we somehow miraculously have. And so my real plea to conservationists, regardless of where they're coming from, is that we approach people who are unlike ourselves with a great deal of empathy in our hearts and really take the time to actually really listen to what they're trying to say. You won't agree with all of them, and I don't want you to ever not say what you believe in and not say, I think wolves should roam free and all of that. That's all good to say that. But do so with that humility of hearing someone else.
I would say, Julie, I think it's the greatest job in the world that we have. I mean, and so I think it's true that we have to write grants, and you have to sort of orient yourself towards grants. But to me, that doesn't take away any of the excitement of doing the job. I mean, here we are doing biology and getting paid. And doing something that we feel really good about when you go to bed at night. I mean, you feel like, okay, I'm really working hard to make the world a better place. And it's fun, it's always different. And so for me, it's a really great job, and so that's the enthusiasm part. And then getting grant is kind of like giving out grades, you know, it's kind of just the part that's not so great of it, but the teaching part's great, and the research part's great. Getting grants, and for me, even accounting is the other part that's challenging. But that's why you have to handle all of my. No, anyway. But anyway, so no, I wouldn't want to make it seem like the enthusiasm goes away just in chasing the grants.
Yeah, I think this is the easiest job to be optimistic at being a professor at a university. Because every year, there's a new batch. They keep on getting younger year after year. But a new batch of fresh, wide-eyed students that want to save the world. I'm on the scholarship committee, and I read essays for the incoming freshmen, high school students who are writing essays, and almost all of them are about saving the world. And we get those students, and it's so invigorating because I'm surrounded by them. Of course, we spend the next 4 years beating that passion out of them as we train them to be technical scientists, but so
We have another group coming in.
yeah, but yeah, exactly. They keep coming. But the teaching is free. We don't have to compete for teaching dollars, you know? We don't have to compete for teaching dollars. And if that's a rewarding part of your job, and this is a big part of our job, then we get that reward. And about the research dollars of the publications, you know, if somebody more worthy got it, the beauty of the common mission is if they can do a better job protecting biodiversity than I can, then go for it. Go for it. It makes collaboration so easy. This is liberating. Really, when you understand the common mission, it's liberating because you're not just searching for the truth. You're working together.
So one thing I've been hearing a lot is advising people to follow their passion within this field. And what I'm wondering, I can sort of imagine that if everybody follows their passion, there might be certain things that nobody wants to do, that don't get done, that need to get done. And so what I'm wondering is, are there things you've noticed that don't get done, or are you confident that if everybody follows their passion, everything that needs to get done will get done?
Well, not a lot of people go into systematics anymore. So, I mean, there's certainly fields that we need that people aren't passionate about. And that's a concern.
The systematists are passionate about it, though.
They are, but there's not enough of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't all work on wolves. Yeah. That's a problem that I have at the undergrad level.
I'm surprised that nobody's talked about the speed up, which is a term people used to use for meaning every year there's more work and less money. And with the complexity of digital devices and digital communication, we're all expected to do more, to respond faster, to respond to more people, by email or other avenues. It's just getting harder and harder. So a lot of the things people have said I agree with. For example, go to meetings of the local parks board, but it's 6 o'clock and we haven't graded all the papers, or we haven't finished the grant proposal, and the kids are at home and the wife is getting angry, and you know, it's or vice versa, the husband's getting angry in many cases now. It's just gets harder and harder. We have more and more work to do. I don't see how people keep up anymore with all their responsibilities. And so that's another dimension to these problems. It not only affects conservation biologists, it's affecting everybody in this technological society. So I mean, it would be great if we had the time to go to all these meetings and talk to people in different disciplines. But it's most academics, I think, probably work 60 hours a week. And it's just a lot of work. And the same goes in almost any other competitive field.
So this is addressing Sanjan's earliest point, which was that conservation biology is basically driven by a privileged group of people. And I'm wondering, how do you engage poor people, right? I mean, going to grad school is not something that somebody out of the inner city does. How do you engage poor people both in the U.S. and internationally in this?
I mean, there's a couple of dimensions to that challenge. How do you make this movement broader? For me, when I was growing up, it was very difficult for me to imagine a path like mine, because my parents, who were very encouraging, as parents are, really did not see any value in me doing anything to do with wildlife. It was a hobby, and it could be treated as a hobby, but they certainly really didn't want me to go into that field, because they just literally did see it as something white people did. I mean, and when I watched television back then, whatever I got in West Africa was growing up, it was David Attenborough and Gerald Durrell, who were great heroes of mine, but, it's pretty obvious that I couldn't find a role model. I actually still can't in a lot of ways. So, first, part of it is creating role models that you can sort of start appreciating and start just even opening up that door to so many kids around the world who won't even consider this as a field. It just isn't there, right? So that's part of it. And it's still incredibly, incredibly monochromatic. I mean, I can't tell you, the head of every major conservation organization is white, and mostly male and white. The board of governors or the societies are mostly that way too. I mean, I cannot tell you how hard it is to find role models who are not in that sphere. And I made a living out of it because I'm different, and so immediately I stand up and they won't fire me, and it's fantastic. So it's good for me as an individual, but it's bad for the movement. I think the second part of it is to really see what is the value proposition for someone who's poor to enter the field. So if you're really poor, you're really trying to do the quickest way in which you can to put food on the table. You usually have a bigger family to support. You might be the only one who got through college. So even if you escape it, then you won't end up coming here, because we don't pay very well. We don't treat our own folks that well, so you don't see it as a legitimate avenue. And then the things we talk about just don't interest them. So if you were a kid born in Detroit or Chicago or LA, you're talking about air quality or the water you drink. So do you know, like, African Americans and Hispanics routinely poll higher than white Americans on virtually every environmental poll that you can find out there? Like, do you care about nature? Do you care about environment? Virtually every bond initiative that has to do with clean air, clean water, land, invariably Hispanics and blacks do better in terms of how they vote than whites do. And yet we put no effort into those communities. They don't want to come and study wolves, right? They don't. They want to study something that's relevant to their own life, that they have some way of relating to. And we don't provide enough of that. So I really feel for it, because we're caught in a bind. We don't have the role models, and then we have no way of getting them out into it, because we're not giving them enough places to sort of, play around in.
So on that note, it has been an hour and a half, and it's time to drink beer. But before we do, I want to give a deep thank you, and I want you to join me. These guys really, I think, provided a lot of deep thought into how we as individuals and collectively can move forward.
So hang on. The one thing I just want to thank Jody for doing this. It's an extraordinarily difficult job, and for Joel for standing up and summarizing it. And I also want to say that, on behalf of the three of us, I hope that whoever you end up working with as a graduate advisor, that you too get the opportunity that 10 years down the road, that your colleagues and your friends enough with them that you can sit and be on a panel with them. It's kind of a rare and cool thing to do.